Now, I want to start by saying the first thing people always ask me is why I should care about the politics of your country. And I say there's two simple reasons. The first one is basic gratitude. My country was only saved in World War II because of the sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers in the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway. So there's a lot of gratitude for that. The second reason is related but a little more selfish. Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope of mankind. If freedom fails in the United States, it will fail everywhere. And I get emails all the time from Americans who say, if things go bad here, can I come down and live in New Zealand? And I say, come down for a holiday, you'll love it. But this is the front line now. There is nowhere to run. 1,500 miles to the north of my country lie the beautiful Fijian Islands. Wonderful tourist destination, but they now have a Marxist-led government. The Chinese are training the Fijian military and are building big hydroelectric dams on the islands. Fiji is now a Chinese client state, and that's happening right throughout the South Pacific. A few months ago, the Australian Minister of Defence was up in China for talks, and a top Chinese official embarrassed him publicly. He said, now is the time for Australia to choose. Do you stay under American protection or do you come under Chinese protection? And that kind of threat would not have been issued under Reagan or under Bush or maybe even under Clinton. But it's being issued now because the bad guys of the world, Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, North Korea, and all their radical allies are getting bolder and bolder because of the leadership they see coming from your White House. And all around this planet, your allies, from Israel to Japan to Korea to Australia, they're all freaking out because they see that your president loves the bad guys more than he loves them. And that's causing a lot of instability, a lot of fear, and if it carries on, it will lead the world into war. Your president cries peace, but he's leading you in the opposite direction. Now I'm going to talk about, for a start, what I call the central secret of communism. And that's not atom bomb spies or Labour Union agitators. It is the ability of a tiny Marxist-Leninist party to get their policies implemented as the law of the land in their country. So how could that possibly be? How could a few hundred or a few thousand comrades possibly influence public policy in a country of 5 million or 10 million or 100 million voters? Well, I want to tell you how it's done, and I first want to lead off with an example from my country, New Zealand. Back in 1984, we elected a socialist Labour government. And one of the first things they did was to ban nuclear warships from our harbours. And as you people were the only people sending nuclear warships to New Zealand, that overnight killed the Australia-New Zealand-United States military alliance. ANZUS was destroyed at the stroke of a pen. So how could a pro-Western country, one that had been saved by you guys only a few decades before, how come at the height of the Cold War we could turn our back so willingly on the Western alliance? Well, this is how it was done. A few years after that, I had the privilege of spending a lot of time interviewing a New Zealander who had infiltrated the New Zealand Communist Party for our security intelligence services. He was a government spy inside the communists. And in 1983, he was given the greatest honour any communist could enjoy. He was sent to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning on Leningradsky Prospect. And this was not a small place. This was 3,500 communists from all over the world, many of them on 7-year courses, many of them with one-to-one tutelage. This was a training academy of the future world communist leadership. There were people there from Sri Lanka and the Philippines and Denmark and Venezuela and Argentina and Canada and Taiwan and Japan. Virtually every country of the world was represented except for one. And that was you guys, the United States of America, the main enemy. So why were no Americans training there in Moscow? Because at some point, your government had told the Soviet Union that were any Americans ever caught training at that institute, there would be war. And the Soviets respected that, but what they would do, they would train Canadians or Mexicans or New Zealanders in the doctrines they wanted promoted, and those people would go and train the American communists. So my friend sat down in a little room with the other 3 members of his delegation, people from the KGB and tutors from the Institute. And they had a plan, a very important plan, because this was the time of the massive anti-nuclear marches through Europe. Hundreds of thousands of people were marching through European capitals against NATO, against Star Wars, against the nuclear umbrella over Europe, for peace, against the military. And the Soviets were, of course, funding all of these peace marches and funding the local communist parties that organised them because they wanted the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation to break up so that they could dominate Europe. Because in those times, as now, your military has been Moscow's #1 target. So they were thinking, the Soviets, well, we've got this all going on in Europe. How about, we're chess players, right? We're strategists. How about we break away another country from outside Europe, out of the Western Alliance, and the psychological and propaganda impact of that will lead to the destruction of NATO, will spur on the movement. So they picked on New Zealand because they're small, progressive, socially liberal, and the communists controlled our labour movement, they controlled our peace movement, and they had infiltrated our Labour Party. So they thought, well, how are we going to do this? You know, we can't sell this as anti-American because New Zealand loves America. We're going to have to try a different angle. So this was going to have to be Kiwis standing up for peace, Kiwis standing against the nuclear arms race, New Zealanders striking an independent foreign policy course, all patriotic, pro-New Zealand stuff. No anti-Americanism, just pro-New Zealand. So they worked out all the slogans and all the psychology. They had marketing experts there, psychologists, very sophisticated operation. They worked it all out, and this little delegation went back to New Zealand, held secret meetings with the Labour Party, with the unions and the peace movement. They mounted a campaign, and within a few short months, that legislation was in front of our Parliament, it was signed off, and our alliance with you was dead. And it's still not been revived to this day. And I will tell you that if you talk to any Kiwi, any New Zealander about our anti-nuclear stand of 1984, they'll almost certainly puff out their chest with pride and say, yeah, we did it, we stood up for peace, we stood against the nuclear arms race. And they'll be so proud of what they've done. And hardly one of them in 4 million people would have any idea at all that those policies were designed by the KGB at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. Totally duped. But could this happen here in America? Surely not. Well, I want to give you a couple of examples. And I'll start with a small symbolic example from California. Where else? Okay. Every year, the lucky Californians get a paid day off work to celebrate the life of the great labor union leader, Cesar Chavez. The man who was trained by the communist agitator Saul Alinsky himself, marched with communists and socialists his entire life, and marched under the famous banner, "Se puede, yes we can." Some of you may have heard that one. It's exactly where it came from. Obama was even down in California a week ago, making Cesar Chavez's home into a national monument. But the woman who got that through is a woman called Evelina Alarcon of the Cesar Chavez Holiday Campaign. And she got a whole bunch of left-wing movie stars, labor union people, and, all her friends in the California state legislature, and she got that pushed through. And now she's got it through in 10 more states. And she wants to take it nationwide. And her website proudly lists the endorsement for her campaign from your president himself, Mr. Obama. But I'm sure Mr. Obama would have not known, and I'm sure most Californians would have no idea, but Evelina Alarcon was the longtime leader of the Southern California Communist Party USA. But she's changing America. So what about a big, meaty, grunty example, one that's going to affect every single person in this room, every single American? Stands to socialise between 1/6 and 1/4 of your economy. Not hard to guess what that might be. Obamacare. Now, I acknowledge that it's not yet fully socialised healthcare, or single payer as they call it, but we all know where it's going to go if it's allowed to stand, and it cannot be allowed to stand. The father of the socialised healthcare movement in this country is a retired Chicago physician named Quentin Young. The guy's pushing 90 now, but he's been working on this issue since the 1950s. He's set up numerous doctors' groups, alliances all over the country, worked with state legislatures, worked with congressmen like John Conyers. He's been pushing it hard. But it was only in 2009, with the Affordable Health Care Act, that they really started to make progress. And it's not surprising that the progress was made under Mr. Obama, because for many years in Chicago, Quentin Young was Barack Obama's personal physician. He openly claims credit for indoctrinating Obama into the ideas of socialised healthcare. But more than that, Quentin Young was a 40-year veteran of the Communist Party USA until he left that organisation to set up a new Marxist group called Democratic Socialists of America. And if you think Democratic Socialists of America sounds a bit wimpy and a bit pro-American and it's only socialist and it's all democratic, one of its top leaders, a man called Kurt Stand, is still serving a 17-year jail sentence in your country for spying for East Germany and the former Soviet Union. From his jail cell in 2008, he wrote a little article praising Mr. Obama, saying how he'd been watching him for years and saying what a transformational president he thought he would make. And on the subject of Democratic Socialists of America, the Obama campaign released a little video lately, and it was designed to embarrass Mitt Romney, because they said in this video, the man who designed Romney Care was a Massachusetts state rep called John McDonough. It's not quite true. He designed it, but Mitt Romney modified it extensively, tried to counter a lot of it. Then they go on to say, well, guess what? We brought John McDonough in, and he designed the Affordable Health Care Act. So ha-ha, Mitt Romney, you can't criticise Obamacare when he designed your system. But what the Obama video doesn't say is that John McDonough was for several years the Boston chair of Democratic Socialists of America. So a Marxist designed both systems. And this is happening all the time. You guys think the Democrats done it. It wasn't the Democrats. Because how it works is simple. Since 1995, when John Sweeney, a member of Democratic Socialists of America, became president of the AFL-CIO, your main labour union body, the communists and Marxists have flooded back. They now control every major labour union in your country, from the AFL-CIO to SEIU, AFSCME, NEA, you name it, they run it. So how it works, the Marxists set a policy. This is what we want for America. They then make it labour union policy. because they control the Labour unions. The Labour unions then go to Democrat Party conventions at state and national level and promote that policy and make it Democrat Party policy. The Labour unions also go out and get Democrats elected, and you know in Wisconsin there's hardly a Democrat at any level that doesn't owe his job to the Labour unions. So if you owe your job to someone, you do what they tell you. So that's how small groups of Marxists, by making their policy into Labour union policy, can then make it into Democrat Party policy. Card check, cap and trade, comprehensive immigration reform, Obamacare, all of it started out as Marxist communist policy. All of it is now Democrat policy. If you want to know what the Democrats are going to do tomorrow, you read Democratic Socialists of America's Democratic Left or the Communist Party's People's World, because what's in their pages today will be on the floor of your state legislature or the floor of your Congress tomorrow. So why is Well, go to Mr. Obama. A lot of people say to me, they say, what a great movement Mr. Obama made. Wasn't it amazing? I say the opposite. I say a movement made Mr. Obama. Is anybody here from Chicago that openly admits it? Yes, sir. Good for you. Okay. It's a wonderful place. Just politics suck. Okay. But we all know South Chicago is a pretty bleak industrial area. It's not the prettiest part of America. But there's a little oasis in South Chicago, Hyde Park. And that's the area around the University of Chicago. And it's full of trees and squirrels and communists, basically. So back in the 1950s, the Socialist Party and the Communist Party in Hyde Park, working through the Democrats, decided they wanted to take on the Democrat daily machine, the corrupt daily machine that ran Chicago for decades. So this was basically Marxist Democrats versus gangster Democrats. Okay, that's what it was. So to do that, they knew they had to broaden their base. So what they did was formed a big alliance with the blacks and the Latinos and the labor unions of South Chicago. So communists, socialists, Democrats, blacks, Latinos, labor unions. Does any of that sound familiar? That is the blueprint for the Obama machine. And the first person they elected was a man called Leon Dupre to the Chicago City Council. He was a lawyer, thorn in the side of the dailies. When he left, he went back to the law, became a close friend and a mentor to a man called Barack Obama. Back in the 1920s, Leon Dupre was going down to the local rifle range in Chicago to practice target shooting for the communist revolution that he believed. He practiced target shooting with his best friend, Saul Alinsky, for the communist revolution they believed was just around the corner. In the 1940s, Dupre was going down to Mexico City to visit with Leon Trotsky, the exiled Soviet leader then hiding out from Comrade Stalin. The next person they elected was a black lawyer named Harold Washington to the Chicago Mayoralty in 1983. Long-time Communist Party supporter, stacked his administration from top to bottom with Marxists, absolutely stacked it. He died in 1987 and the daily machine reconquered Chicago. The next person they elected was a woman called Carol Moseley Brown. Eyes always roll when I mention Carol. Put her into the US Senate from Illinois in 1992. Long-time Communist Party supporter, almost certainly a secret party member. Very corrupt, only lasted one term, and then President Clinton made her an ambassador from your country overseas. And guess where he sent her? New Zealand. Thank you, Mr. Clinton. The next person they elected was, of course, Mr. Obama himself to the Illinois State Senate in 1996. Then in 2004, they put him into the US Senate, and by expanding their networks nationwide, in 2008, they put him into the White House. And Mr. Obama has been fulfilling their agenda every day of his term of office. He knows who put him there. He knows who he owes his job to. So why is Mr. Obama so happy to work with the Marxist left, the people we thought had all shriveled up and gone away to die at the end of the Reagan era? Well, really, he knows nothing else. That's his entire life. He hasn't really worked with anyone else. And the first significant mentor, of course, to Mr. Obama was a man called Frank Marshall Davis. Who's heard of Frank? About half of you? Okay. Frank Marshall Davis, black guy, a poet, a journalist, a jazz critic, a writer. He was a very influential man in Chicago in the late 40s because that was the black left, the jazz era. It was cool to be a communist. And Frank Marshall Davis was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, a member of the Dory Miller Club of the Chicago Party. But in 1948, this very popular man in Chicago left all the glamour and glitz behind and moved way out into the Pacific to a little backwater called Hawaii. And it was a backwater in those days, before statehood, before the tourist trade. So why would he do that? Well, a few years before that, Comrade Stalin had told the American Communist Party to put as many comrades as they could get out onto the islands for a reason. And what do you think interested Comrade Stalin out in Hawaii? Well, what interested the Japanese in 1941? Pearl Harbor, most strategic military base in the Pacific. Because as I keep saying, then as now, your military is Moscow's number one target. Because there's nothing else that stands between them and what they want, which is control of all of you and everyone else. So Frank was a loyal communist out there. He worked for a publication called the Honolulu Record, labor union publication. His boss was a man called Koji Ariyoshi, Japanese-American communist. He had worked in China during World War II with the United States Army with Mao Zedong's communists against the Japanese. After the war, Ariyoshi went to New York where he worked with the Amerasia people. Amerasia was a left-wing magazine staffed by communists and several known Soviet KGB agents who were working with the secret communists in your State Department to tilt US foreign policy away from Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese towards Mao Zedong's communist Chinese. And because they succeeded in getting your government to withdraw military support for Chiang Kai-shek, 500 million Chinese were delivered to the communists. So Frank, the left say about Frank, they say, yeah, well, he looked after Obama, but he was just a civil rights campaigner. Frank Marshall Davis was under FBI surveillance for 19 years. He was the subject of a 600-page file. And the FBI were very worried about Frank because they were getting reports that he was seen on many occasions photographing obscure Hawaiian beaches with a camera with a telescopic lens. They were so concerned, I think they suspected military espionage on behalf of the Soviet Union, that he was put on the security index. That was reserved for the most dangerous communists only. It meant that had war ever broken out with the Soviet Union, Frank Marshall Davis could have been arrested that very day. Yeah, he was just a civil rights campaigner. About 1970, young Barry Soetoro moved back from Indonesia to Hawaii to get his schooling. His maternal grandfather, a man called Stanley Dunham, decided that the young boy needed a black mentor to guide him through his early childhood years. So he picked on his dope-smoking and whiskey-drinking buddy, Frank Marshall Davis, to do the job. Now, this is a man who used to write poems praising the Red Army, articles criticising racist KKK America. He regularly used to call Harry Truman, the Democrat president, a fascist because he opposed communism. And this was the man chosen to mentor your president through his teenage years. And Frank Marshall Davis was with Obama from about the age of 11 to the age of 19. is a man called Frank, mentioned 22 times in Mr. Obama's book, Dreams from My Father, as a mentor, a guide, someone he turned to for advice, someone he discussed politics with. 22 times, but only ever as Frank. And isn't it surprising that a man as open and as transparent as your president should neglect to mention the full name of his mentor? Frank Marshall Davis of the Security Index. Some people say, though, by that time Frank was just a dope-smoking old alcoholic, nothing to worry about. But as late as 1979, Frank Marshall Davis was still listed as an endorser of the American Committee for the Protection of Foreign-Born, the Communist Party's main front of the era. And two names below Frank Marshall Davis was listed a man called Hugh DeLacy. Hugh DeLacy, and hopefully I'll get back to him later in the talk. The next significant, so Obama goes to Occidental, mixes with the Marxists there, goes to Columbia, works with Democratic Socialists of America there, goes back to Chicago, inspired by the election of Harold Washington, the black Marxist mayor, then goes to Harvard, is mentored, as was Michelle, by a Marxist professor called Charles Ogletree. Then he comes back to Chicago and he's got his eyes set on politics. And there was his next significant mentor, a black Illinois state senator named Alice Palmer. Now, these two worked together for years. And in 1996, Alice Palmer decided to run for Congress, and she employed Obama as her chief of staff. And the deal was, you get me elected to Congress, Barack, and then you can take my state Senate seat. And she was the one who took Mr. Obama to the famous meeting in the drawing room of Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn, weather underground terrorists from the 1960s. Quentin Young, the doctor, was at the same meeting. That was Obama's introduction to the Hyde Park left. But things don't always go smoothly in politics, and Alice Palmer lost the primary. So she turned to Mr. Obama and said, look, sorry, Barack, you have to stand down. I need my state Senate seat back. Mr. Obama said, sorry, Alice, I'm running. And he got her disqualified off the ballot by challenging her signatures, many of which were fraudulent. Fancy that, even in Chicago. And he got all the other opponents disqualified in the same manner. But that caused a very big ruction in the Chicago left, and a communist named Timuel Black, a friend of both Obama and Alice Palmer's, was brought in to mediate. But Obama was dead set, he was running, and that was the end of their friendship. But it's fair to say that Alice Palmer was a significant mentor to your president, the woman who got him his first job in politics. But what about her history? In 1980, Alice Palmer was invited by Maurice Bishop, the communist dictator of Grenada in the Caribbean, to the first anniversary celebrations of that country's Marxist-Leninist revolution. In 1983, Maurice Bishop was murdered by some of his own comrades, and in the ensuing chaos, your president, Mr. Reagan, sent troops onto the islands. And my friend was training in Moscow when that happened, and the Soviets were absolutely spitting tacks. Bloody Ronald Reagan had shut down what was going to become the second Cuba of the Caribbean. They were not happy. So we got Mr. Reagan to thank for that one. And incidentally, well, the next year, the same year, Alice Palmer was in Prague, communist Czechoslovakia, for a meeting of the World Peace Council. Now that's very significant because the World Peace Council, which still exists, was the Soviet Union's #1 international front. They put billions of rubles into it. They had affiliates all over the world, and its job was to sow propaganda against your military, against NATO, against Star Wars, against weapon systems, against your bases all over the world. Its job was to sow discontent against the United States military, their #1 front. And when my friend was training in Moscow, he had the opportunity to sit down with Comrade Venedev, one of the tutors of the Institute, and they were discussing how they were going to scam New Zealand through the peace movement. And Mr. Venedev said, he said to my friend John, he said, you know what, John? He said, There are many very, very clever people in the Soviet Union, but no one has yet come up with a weapon as powerful as the peace movement. That is the store the Soviets set by their peace movement and their control of it, because it was targeted at their number one enemy, your military. Alice Palmer was also on the United States executive of the United States Peace Council, the World Peace Council affiliate here. She served there with 16 members of the Communist Party USA. And a woman from California who's now a congressman called Barbara Lee. And when all the California Democrats were going for Hillary in 2008, Barbara Lee was the first one to stand up and endorse Mr. Obama. Alice Palmer was also running the Black Press Institute out of Chicago, a nationwide network of black communist journalists whose job was to sow Soviet disinformation to your country's black population and to work with your congressional black caucus. In 1985, she took 16 of these people to Czechoslovakia, East Germany, and the Soviet Union for meetings with high-ranking government officials and the editor of Pravda. In 1986, Alice Palmer was in Moscow covering that year's annual conference of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The same year, she was elected North American Vice President of the International Organization of Journalists, a bona fide KGB front. And her job was to monitor activities for the Soviet Union and Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean. So you've got Frank Marshall Davis, communist, Obama mentor, anti-military activist, possible Soviet spy. Alice Palmer, Democrat, Obama enabler, definite Soviet agent of influence, and anti-military activist. But what about the people around Obama today? And I haven't got till 4 in the morning, so I'll just pick on a couple of them. First one, the other half of Obama's brain, and even the Liberals call her that, dear old Valerie Jarrett, Obama's closest friend and most trusted advisor in the White House, the most powerful woman in America. But where did she come from? Well, her mother is a woman called Barbara Bowman, child psychologist out of Chicago, runs the Erickson Institute. It's an early childhood institution that has had a lot of influence on early childhood education in your country. In 2009, Barbara Bowman was given an award for her work by your president, and that ceremony was prominently featured in the pages of the Communist Party's People's World. Erik Erikson, the man it was named after, an errant disciple of Sigmund Freud, he coined the term identity crisis. Some of you might have heard of that. Back in the 1940s, he was kicked out of Berkeley in California because he refused to sign an anti-communist loyalty oath. He was also a lecturer at the California Labor School, the Communist Party's main trade union school. On the board of the Erickson Institute have served Tom Ayers, the father of weather underground terrorist Bill Ayers, and Bernadine Dawn, the wife of Bill Ayers and a famous terrorist in her own right. Valerie Jarrett's maternal grandfather, a man called Robert Taylor, first black head of the Chicago Housing Authority. Back in 1940, he was affiliated with a wonderful sounding organization, the American Peace Mobilization, Communist Party's main front of the time. And do you know what their job was? It was to keep your government and your troops out of World War II. Because at that time, the Nazis had overrun most of Europe and were about to conquer Britain. But at that time, the Nazis were still allies of the Soviet Union. They had signed a non-aggression pact. And Comrade Stalin had ordered your comrades here to try and keep your troops out of Europe, basically to make sure Hitler could finish the job. But in 1941, Hitler betrayed Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union. And within 24 hours, the American Peace Mobilization became the American People's Mobilization, the most pro-war, let's get Hitler, let's destroy the Nazis organization in the country. within 24 hours. And Robert Taylor was involved with that organisation alongside a fellow Chicago activist called Frank Marshall Davis. Go on the other side of Valerie Jarrett's family, her late father-in-law, Vernon Jarrett, very prominent black Chicago journalist. The last thing he did before he died of cancer in 2004 was to issue a call to the black population of South Chicago to get out and vote for Mr. Obama in that year's Senate primaries. But you go back to 1946, Vernon Jarrett was serving on the Illinois State Executive of another wonderful sounding organisation, American Youth for Democracy. And guess which political party that was the youth wing of? Communist Party USA. Go forward to 1948, Vernon Jarrett was serving on the Illinois State he was serving on the Packing House Workers Strike Committee, Publicity Committee. And on that the Packing House Workers were a communist-controlled union. On that, basically, communist-controlled union, and Vernon Jarrett was writing their press releases and propaganda. And on that little publicity committee with Vernon Jarrett served a man called Frank Marshall Davis. So isn't it interesting, the two most powerful people in this country, Valerie Jarrett and Barack Obama, can both trace their political lineage back to the Chicago Communist Party of the 1940s, and specifically to suspected Soviet spy Frank Marshall Davis. So what about the other half of Mr. Obama's brain, which doesn't leave very much? Joe Biden, perhaps? Bit of a cheap shot. Okay, David Axelrod, the man who got Obama elected and is now trying to get him re-elected. The man who wins his elections by negative campaigning and blackening the name of his opponents. Back in 2004, when Mr. Obama was running against a Republican for the Senate, a man called Jack Ryan, Ryan was expected to win easily. Some secret divorce records were illegally unsealed. A sex scandal was uncovered, and Jack Ryan was sunk. But where did Mr. Axelrod get his tricks from? Where did he learn his trade? Well, back when he came to Hyde Park, Chicago in the early 70s to study political science, he was picked up and mentored by two local activists, Don Rose and David S. Cantor. The three of them formed a team. They all worked together on the Carol Moseley Brown campaign and on the second Harold Washington campaign. Don Rose got Mr. Axelrod his first job in big-time journalism. They looked after him for several years. But before they had done that, the two men had run a little publication called the Hyde Park Kenwood Voices, and it was the voice of the Hyde Park left. It carried articles about Quentin Young's trip to North Vietnam to give aid to the communists during the war, about his son Ethan's trip to Cuba to cut sugarcane for Castro. It also carried a regular column by a man called Abner Mikva, local congressman, and he was very much part of their operation. Mikva hated gun rights. That's what he campaigned against in Congress. After he left Congress, he became an open supporter of Democratic Socialists of America and also a law professor at the University of Chicago. And in that role, he became a friend and mentor to Mr. Obama. But he was also a friend and mentor to another American lawyer who I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that is Elena Kagan, who now serves on your Supreme Court. Don Rose, one half of the partnership, Communist Party fronter since the 1940s. He coined the famous phrase, "The whole world is watching," and that was during the 1968 riots in Chicago, which he helped to organise. A long-time executive member of another wonderful sounding organisation, the Chicago Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights. Now, wouldn't you all back that one? But so would the Communist Party, because they controlled it. The other half of the partnership, David Cantor. His father was Harry Cantor, leader of the Massachusetts Communist Party in the 1930s. In 1932, he took his whole family, including baby David, to the Soviet Union, where they lived for several years. He was granted a personal audience with Comrade Stalin, and he was given a job translating Lenin's works from Russian into English. To a communist, the equivalent of it being allowed to translate the Bible. 1948, both Cantors were living in Chicago, both active members of the Communist Party. That year, Harry Cantor bought a little communist publication called the Chicago Star off its owner. And why did the owner want to sell it? Well, he couldn't run it from Hawaii, could he? Because that was Frank Marshall Davis. Go forward to 1960. David Cantor and his best friend Leroy Wolins, another Communist Party member who incidentally founded Veterans for Peace, another Communist Party anti-military front, had a little publication company, Translation World Publishers. And they were getting a regular subsidy from the Soviet embassy in Washington to distribute communist and Russian literature all over your country. The two men were formally required to register by your government as agents of the Soviet Union. Go forward to 1964. Any Goldwater girls or guys here? Good, I knew there'd be some. He was a great man. That was the big race. Lyndon Johnson, the Democrat, versus Barry Goldwater, the Republican. Lyndon Johnson won. You got the Great Society, the biggest expansion of federal welfareism and federal power since the New Deal. You're still suffering for it today. Barry Goldwater was a conservative, a constitutionalist. He would have loved the Tea Party. He would have loved the conservative resurgence that we see today, and I'm sure you guys would have loved him. Had he won, this country would be a lot healthier today. But he didn't win. The Kennedy assassination was a big factor in that. But he was also viciously vilified in the press of this country as a racist, a fascist, and an extremist. He was basically said to be in bed with the John Birch Society to create a fascist push, a fascist takeover of the United States. And one of the main sources of the vilification of Barry Goldwater was Translation World Publishers of Chicago, David Cantor's little Soviet-subsidized, communist-run firm. So your Mr. Axelrod got his training at the hands of a Soviet-paid professional black propagandist and character assassin. So you wonder why he's as dirty and as ruthless as he is. Now that brings me to another key member of the Obama administration. Household word, your Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta. Leon Panetta voted in 100-0 through your US Senate. The body charged with protecting your country and guarding your Constitution put a man like that into an important position like that. Leon Panetta's public record alone should have been enough to disqualify him. Leon Panetta was a Democrat congressman out of Santa Cruz, California for several years. And the Santa Cruz Democrat Party is not like the Idaho Democrat Party. It is a far-left, lunatic fringe, nutcase, communist California Democrat Party. A little bit like your Wisconsin Democrat Party. Okay. No Democrats here, are there? Look, Leon Panetta had members of Democratic Socialists of America on his campaign committees. He put tributes in the Congressional Record to communist peace activists like Lucy Hassler. He spent most of his time criticising Reagan for Star Wars, criticising Reagan for opposing communism in Latin America, calling for the US defence budget to be cut. He was a far-left, anti-military Democrat. That's his public record. But what about his private record? Well, Leon Panetta and Sylvia Panetta were best friends with a Santa Cruz couple, Hugh and Dorothy DeLacy. Hugh DeLacy, American Committee for the Protection of Foreign-Born with Frank Marshall Davis. The couples had parties at each other's houses. They were best of friends for 9 or 10 years. When Hugh DeLacy died in 1986, there was a eulogy, a service held for him in Santa Cruz. Leon Panetta gave one of the eulogies. The other 3 speakers were all members of Democratic Socialists of America. Hugh de Lacy and Leon Panetta shared a series of letters over 9 or 10 years, which I have, all of which were criticising Reagan for Star Wars, criticising US defence spending, and calling for the military budget to be cut. And Hugh de Lacy, Leon Panetta should have known that his friend was going down to Nicaragua to visit with the Sandinistas during that time. He was going to Spain to visit with the Spanish Communist Party, but it didn't seem to bother him. But Hugh de Lacy had a bit of a history too. Back in 1940, he was elected to the National Executive of the American Peace Mobilization, the pro-Nazi, pro-communist front. In 1946, he became a Democrat congressman out of Washington State. And that was the time they used to talk about the 47 states of the Union and the Soviet of Washington. The communists ran the state. And Hugh de Lacy spent most of his time in Congress criticising America for backing Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese and urging support for Mao Zedong's communist, or as he called them, agrarian reformers. And it's not surprising he did that, because all the time he was in Congress, and right up to the 1970s at least, Hugh de Lacy was a secret card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA. Certainly not the first secret communist in your Congress, and definitely not the last. But the devil looks after his own. 1975, Hugh de Lacy was contacted by an old friend from the 1940s, a Stanford University academic named John Stuart Service. The two men had worked together on Chinese issues back in those days. And John Stuart Service arranged for Hugh and Dorothy de Lacy to get a free month-long trip to Communist China in 1975. And I'm sure the Chinese were okay with that, because John Stuart Service had been a former KGB agent, a member of the Amerasia spy ring, which gave China to the communists. And while he was over there, the de Lacys had time to visit with two American expatriates, Frank Coe and Solomon Adler, and they shared a correspondence after they left China. Frank Coe was then working as a propagandist for the Chinese government, a former member of the Amerasia Soviet spy ring. Solomon Adler was also a former member of the Amerasia Soviet spy ring, and at the time was working as an advisor to the Chinese intelligence services, a live Chinese spy. Back in the United States, Hugh de Lacy was corresponding with a man called Don Wheeler, a Communist Party member out of Washington State, a former member of the Silver Master KGB spy ring of 1940s Washington, D.C. Also corresponding with a man called Victor Perlow, a communist from Connecticut, another former member of the Silver Master KGB spy ring of the 1940s. Now, anybody here ever had a security clearance done on them, an FBI security check? Yep, I'm sure there's a few here. They're pretty extensive, aren't they? Go through your childhood, your school friends, your work colleagues, your education, practically go through your underwear drawers. But Leon Panetta was best friends with a secret communist for many years, and that secret communist personally knew 5 former KGB agents, one of whom was still alive serving Chinese intelligence agent. How do you think Leon Panetta would go if he had to get a security clearance to be a janitor at a military base? Reckon he'd pass? How do you think Mr. Obama would go? Probably not very well. Back in the United States, Hugh de Lacy was also serving as a West Coast agent for In These Times, a Marxist journal out of Chicago. And that was run by a man called James Weinstein, former Communist Party member, founder of Democratic Socialists of America, and once reportedly peripherally involved in the Rosenberg spy ring of the 1940s, the people who gave Stalin the A-bomb secrets. And in 2002, James Weinstein and a whole bunch of Chicago communists organised a big anti-Iraq war rally in Federal Plaza in downtown Chicago. And that was where an Illinois state senator made his name nationwide as an opponent of the Iraq war. And who do you think that might have been? Barack Hussein Obama. So I repeat my claim. Obama didn't make a movement made Obama. and elements of that movement do not owe allegiance to your country. Many elements of it. So that brings me to what I consider the real agenda of the left. What do they want for your country? Do they want to make you like France, as some people would tell you, eating croissants and drinking red wine all day? Would that be so tough? Well, I want to say what I think the agenda is, and before I do that, I want to build up a little bit of credibility for a retired Albuquerque high school math teacher named Mark Rudd. Now, Mark Rudd was the brains of the Weather Underground terrorist organisation. He was right up there in the top leadership with Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn. Now, 2006, Mark Rudd and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn and Jeff Jones, who incidentally, another Weather Underground terrorist leader, who incidentally helped write Obama's stimulus package, and a whole bunch of communists set up a new movement called the Movement for a Democratic Society. And that spawned an offshoot group called Progressives for Obama, headed by Tom Hayden. And that was endorsed by Mr. Rudd. So what I'm trying to say is that Mark Rudd is a key member of the United States left, and he knows people like Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn who have worked with Mr. Obama for many years. So when he predicts Obama's agenda, I will give him some credibility. Now in 2008, just after the election, Mr. Obama appointed several conservatives to positions in your country's defence establishment. And some people on our side of the fence breathed a big sigh of relief. Oh, maybe he's going to be a moderate. Maybe we can trust this guy. But the left were absolutely spewing. They were livid. And Mark Rudd's inbox was filling up with emails from irate comrades from all over the country. And he knew he had a problem because these people were very annoyed at what Obama had done. So to get the comrades back on board, he wrote a little article for the Rag blog out of Texas, very widely read on the left. And he called it, "Let's Get Smart About Obama." And it was put out in November 28, 2008. And this is what he said to get the comrades back on board. Obama is a very strategic thinker. He knew precisely what it would take to get elected, and he didn't blow it. He knew he had to play to the centre to not be run over by the press, the Republicans, or to scare centrist voters. He made it. But never, never threaten the military budget. That will unite a huge majority of Congress against him. Leave the military alone because they are way too powerful for now. By the second or third year of this recession, people may begin to discuss cutting the military budget. So where are we now, folks? We're 3 years in, right? You're all worried about the economics, your jobs, your businesses, and while you're worried about that, smiling Leon Panetta is over at your Defence Department cutting your military to ribbons. Whole chunks out of the Navy, whole chunks out of the Army, whole weapon systems cancelled. Obama has even got a paper commissioned. He wants to cut your US nuclear arsenal down to 292 nuclear weapons. You used to have 6,000 of them. The Russians alone have more than 1,500. You think about this, folks. Give Obama 4 more years. How much military do you think you'll have left? And what was Mr. Obama talking about in Korea in March with Dmitry Medvedev, then the Russian president, discussing missile defense, thought he was off mic. I need more space, Mr. Medvedev. When I get re-elected, I will have more flexibility to deal with you. Medvedev says, yes, I understand. I will pass your message on to Vladimir. We are with you. That is the single most important thing your president has said in his entire term of office, because that is the agenda of the left, to destroy your military. And Mr. Obama, Mark Rudd hadn't quite finished. He went on to say, Obama plays basketball. I'm not much of an athlete. I barely know the game. But one thing I do know is you have to be able to look like you're doing one thing but do another. That is why all these conservative appointments are important. The strategy is to feint right, move left. Any other strategy invites sure defeat. So I'm going to wind out now. This isn't about a depression, folks, because you can survive a depression. This isn't about losing some of your rights, because you're Americans and you'll stand up and take them back. But have you ever been in the position before when your Commander-in-Chief and your Secretary of Defence are giving your number one enemy everything it wants militarily? Project it forward 4 more years. China has built up its blue water navy. Russia has rearmed. Iran has nuclear weapons. The bad guys are stronger. You've got hardly any military left. A candidate comes along and says, I'm standing for president. I'm going to restore America's military might. Something that will take 30 years. Do you think for 1 minute the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and all their allies will stand back and let you do it? When they've got you exactly where they want you, where they've got you where Frank Marshall Davis wanted to get you, where Alice Palmer wanted to get you, where all the people behind Leon Panetta wanted to get you, when they've finally got you there, are they going to let you out of the trap? If it goes that way, folks, not only will you not be able to defend your allies like Israel or Japan or Korea, you will not even be able to defend your homeland. And you will be faced with either being incorporated into some sort of United Nations world superstate or face the combined military might of all of your enemies with not a friend in the world to come to your aid. So this is a serious situation, folks. But I just want to say, normally I can do something more on this, but I just want to say, if I thought there was no hope for America, I'd be back at New Zealand right now, building bunkers and stocking up on baked beans. But in 2008, you people stood up. In 2010, you people stood up and kicked the left right in the teeth. And you're going to do it this time as well. You are part of the Second American Revolution. So it's big stakes, folks, but the first American Revolution was tough. This one's going to be tough, but you're going to do it. So I just want to say I've got books and literature up the back. I'm here for 8 months trying to get the message out to your country. So please support me when you can. But I just want to say I'm honoured to be here. The organisations represented here today, the Tea Party, the John Birch Society and all your friends, you are the salvation of this country. You are the backbone of this country. That's why I'm here. I'm not here for anyone else because you guys are going to win this thing. Thank you.